Are we ready?
Dave?
Yes.
We're ready.
Go. Okay. So, good morning. This Saturday, May 2nd, 2015, I'll call the special joint meeting of our elected and appointed officials together, i.e. City Council and Planning Commission. And for the City Council, will someone call the roll?
Yes, right here. Councilmember Asher.
Here.
Councilmember Donahue.
Here.
Councilmember Martinez.
Here.
Vice Mayor Davis.
Here.
Mayor Atkin.
Here. Will someone do the same for the Planning Commission?
Yes, indeed. Commissioner Cardoza.
Here.
Commissioner Donaldson.
Here.
Commissioner Gunkel. Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Coomerly has an excused absence today. Vice Chair Tan. Vice Chair Tan. Here.
Here.
And Chair Moss.
Here.
Great. So we have a chance to have some substantive discussion today about proposed regulations, incentives, and guidelines for residential development here in Emeryville. I just want to open and say that this is the start of EPO's Affordable Housing Week, and would just like to remind us that all of these discussions that are underway take place on what was sacred native land, and I just would like to keep that in mind as we move forward today. Do you want to have any introductory comments?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I just wanted to thank everybody for coming on a Saturday, both my, fellow officials and staff for giving up their Saturday, and obviously everybody that's here from the public primarily. I'm sure you have better things to do on a sunny day. We obviously have a lot to get through today. These are very important topics, and they're going to be, we will be better off by having all of the input. For sure, we do have a lot to get through. So if you feel that you aren't able to, get out everything that you want to say, then please, please feel welcome to email the council and the commission and staff later on, because we definitely do want to hear everything that everybody has to say on these topics.
We will have extensive public comment on each agenda item. However, is there any public comment on items not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, let's just move into the staff overview to set the stage.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And just to kind of clarify, I met before this meeting with the mayor and the chair of the Planning Commission, and we've all agreed that I will facilitate the discussion, so the mayor and the vice and the chair don't have to worry about running the meeting. So I just ask everybody to raise your hand if you have something to say, and I will call on you. And the same thing goes for the public. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Before each commissioner and council member and staff, you have two handouts. One is the PowerPoint presentation, so you can follow along if you like, and the other is the full packet for the meeting, which includes the agenda, the staff report, and the two attachments to the staff report. For the public, out in the link and down in the stairway, we also have these handouts, and there's a few extra copies on the desks on either side here. We have the PowerPoint presentation. We also have the packet minus the attachments because they're quite voluminous. Just the agenda and the staff report. If you feel you need the full packet with the attachments, we have a couple of extra copies of that. You can also download that from our website. It's emeryville.org/new residential development rules. Okay, that's all one word, new residential development rules. There are postcards around that announce this meeting, and they have the website listed on it as well. So here is the agenda for the meeting today. We've broken it into two halves. In the morning, we'll be talking about regulations and guidelines for unit mix and family-friendly design, and then we'll have a break for lunch. We'll have sandwiches and salads from Ruby's Cafe. There should be plenty for everybody. And then in the afternoon, we'll be talking about incentives for affordable house and ownership housing, including the bonus point system. In both of these two sessions, we'll follow the same format. There will be a staff presentation by me. We'll then have clarifying questions from the Commission and Council. We'll then open it up to public comment, and then we'll bring it back to the Commission and Council for discussion and deliberation. For the public comment, we have portable microphones on either side. You can just stay in your seat, raise your hand, I'll call on you, staff will bring you a microphone. And we'd also like to ask you to sign the sign-in sheet if you speak. This is optional, you don't have to, but it helps us to make sure we get your name right and get it spelled right and so forth. So after you speak, staff will then hand you the sign-in sheet. And I do want to acknowledge the staff that are here today that have helped to set this up. Diana Kina was kind of the ringleader and orchestrated all of this. We also have Catherine Firpo, Mira Desai, and Sarah Billing is around somewhere. There she is, way in the back. And I believe that Sarah and Miru will be the ones who will be bringing you the microphones to make your public comments. Restrooms are across the way in the new building. You just push the door open, there's no code. Let's see. A couple of other things for the Commission and Council. I would like to request that you speak into your microphones so that what you say will be picked up on the recording and on the video. And also, I would respectfully request that you hold any questions you may have until after I've gotten through my presentation, because we have a lot to cover, and I know we're all anxious to get out of here by 2 if possible, so it would expedite things if you can hold your questions until I get through it. The staff presentations are kind of lengthy because there's a lot to cover, but I'll do my best to make it as concise as possible. So before we get started, are there any questions, or have I forgotten to mention anything? Okay. So, introduction and overview. This section, I'm just going to briefly touch on Emeryville development patterns, issues that we're going to be addressing, and the tools that are available to address those issues. This is a couple of charts that summarize residential development in Emeryville over the last 20 years. We've done an inventory of all the major residential projects built since 1994. And this gives you what the unit mix breakdown and the tenure breakdown is. In terms of unit mix, it's about 10% studios and 43% one bedroom, so a little over half one bedroom and studios, 38% two bedrooms, and 5% three or more bedrooms. We also have about 4% live work. So it's about 43% three and two bedrooms and a little over half studios and one bedrooms. In terms of tenure, it's been about 2/3 rental and 1/3 ownership, 1/3 condominiums. This is shows the total number of units from 2000 to the present time. The 2000 numbers come from the census, and then actually the 2014 numbers are also from the census, and we interpolated between those two using our own inventory of what was built in each year. So as you can see, the total number of units went from about 4,300 to about 6,500, about a 50% increase in that 14-year period. It was pretty flat for the last 5 years or so. So most of this occurred between 2000 and 2010. The bulk of those units were studios and one bedrooms. Not a lot of three-bedroom units, 300 about in 2000 and 400 in 2014, although it has been steadily increasing, but the number is not huge. The Council has asked us to address the issues of unit mix, unit size, family-friendly design, affordable housing, ownership housing, and the development bonus system. So we'll be talking about those things today. The first 3 items will be covered in the morning session, and the second 3 items will be covered in the afternoon session. This is a summary table that tries to capture the tools that we have available to address these issues. So the issues, or attributes, are listed down the left side here, and the tools are listed across the top. We have design guidelines. We have incentives through our development bonus system. We have development impact fees. The city also has a limited amount of affordable housing money that we can use to subsidize affordability in private projects or sponsor our own projects. There's inclusionary zoning without incentives or concessions, and that's where a developer is just told you must provide X number of affordable units with your project. No ifs, ands, or buts, no concessions or incentives, you just have to do it. There's the state density bonus law, which is something we are required to implement by state law. That also provides a density bonus for providing affordable housing, and I'll be talking a little bit more later about how that works. And then finally, we have regulations and requirements, which is just we write it into the code, you have to do it, right? So in terms of how these different tools relate to these different issues, in terms of unit mix, that's already addressed in our incentive, in our development bonus system in terms of family-friendly housing. In order to get a bonus for that, they have to be 3-bedroom. Also, I should just mention the key to this chart. Thumbs up means we've already done it or it's in process. Check mark highlighted means this is something we should be looking at, and those are highlighted because that's going to be the main focus of what we talk about today. Thumbs up and check mark means we've already done it, but we could consider improving upon it. And X just means that you can't do it. It's basically illegal. So in terms of the unit mix, we have that already in our development bonus system, as I said, for family friendly, but it's something we could consider embellishing or elaborating on if we wish. And we can also require this. The city attorney has advised that this is a legitimate use of the city's police power. We can legislate that a certain % of units must be 2 or 3 bedroom or whatever. In terms of family-friendly design, we have design guidelines. I'll be touching on those briefly, not spending a lot of time on that today, though, because that's on a parallel track. These were approved by the Planning Commission at their last meeting on April 23rd, and they'll be coming to the Council for consideration at your May 19th meeting. In terms of incentives and bonuses, again, we do have a bonus for family-friendly housing. We could elaborate on that if we want to, and we can also require that. We can require that a certain number or all units be designed to be family-friendly in conformance with our guidelines. In terms of general residential amenities, this would be for all residential development, not just family development. We have design guidelines for that. That's included in our design guidelines. We can also require that residential projects comply with those guidelines if we wish to. In terms of affordable housing, we've broken that down by rental and condominium because the tools for the two are somewhat different. For both of them, we could have incentive bonus system. And that's going to be a main focus of the afternoon session, is how can we provide incentives to have people provide more affordable and or ownership housing. We also have a development impact fee for rental housing, which was just adopted last year. In terms of city subsidies, we do have some limited amount of subsidy available for both rental and condominium projects. We have a first-time homebuyers program. We also have subsidized or sponsored our own projects, such as the Ambassador Housing Project and 3706 San Pablo Avenue. In terms of inclusionary without incentives or concessions, this is now prohibited for rental housing. We cannot do that anymore. There was a court case that said it's illegal, it's tantamount to rent control, so it's not a tool that's available anymore, which is why we have to look at incentives. The state density bonus law, however, is available for both rental and condominium. Oh, I should also mention inclusionary zoning is still allowed, and we do still have it for condominium projects, because that's not considered rent control. And then finally, for ownership housing, we could try to figure out a way to incentivize that, but the city attorney has advised that we are not legally allowed to legislate the ownership type of a project. So we can't dictate that projects must be condominiums versus rental. So those are the tools that we have available. Now to get into the substance of it, the first half of the meeting or the morning session, this is on family-friendly housing. We're talking about demographic mix, enrollment levels in the school district, unit mix, unit size, family-friendly design guidelines briefly, and then finally wrapping up with the discussion questions that we would like feedback from the Commission and Council on. I want to lead off just by saying that it's been said on a number of occasions that the reason we want to attract more families to Emeryville is to have a more interesting demographic mix, have more families than we have now, more children than we have now, and also to help the Emory Unified School District with their enrollment levels. So I'll be addressing both of those issues. In terms of the characteristics of Emeryville's households, we've looked at the most recent census data, and we've compared Emeryville to some of the surrounding cities, including San Francisco, to the county, to the Bay Area, to California, and to the nation. And we looked at average household size, the percent of single-person households, the percent of households that are families with children, and the percent of residents who are school kids, basically, people who are enrolled in grades K through 12. And as this shows, Emeryville is very different from all of the other places we compare ourselves to. Average household size is only 1.7. Everybody else is more than 2. Percent single persons, we're at more than half, and all the other comparators are a quarter to a third, or even 11% in Piedmont. Families with children is about 1/8 of our population, 12.5%. Other places are quite a bit higher, up to 30% as a national average. And then students enrolled in students enrolled in school, grade K through 12, it's about 6% of our population. National average is almost 3 times that much. So that's just what we are, right? Those are our characteristics. In terms of dwelling units, again, you're looking at the same other geographical areas. We looked at average number of bedrooms per unit, average percent of studio and 1-bedroom units, average percent of units that are 2 or more bedrooms, average number of units that are 3 or more bedrooms, and units that are in buildings that have 10 or more units. In other words, big apartments and condominium buildings. Again, Emeryville stands out, quite different from everybody else. We have 1.34 bedrooms per unit compared to most other places have more than that. The only one that has less than 2 is San Francisco at 1.86. Almost 2/3 of our units are studios and 1-bedrooms. As compared with everybody else, Piedmont, of course, stands out at the other end at less than 5%. About 38% of our units are 2 or more bedroom, and only 7% are 3 or more bedroom, compared to the national average of 60%. We also have 71% of our units in buildings of 10 units or more. And if you notice, that is twice as high as the next highest one, which is San Francisco at 35%. This number here is significant. And I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about that because I think this goes a long way to explaining our demographic mix and the characteristics of our units, that we have so many units in big buildings. So just to briefly talk about the development history of Emeryville, how did we get to be the way we are? This map is from 1878. It's 20 years before the city was incorporated, but basically when we were incorporated, it looked like this. We had a big racetrack, we had an amusement park, a steel mill, a paint plant, we had a slaughterhouses up in the north end of town. Joseph Emery had his mansion on San Pablo. But there were fewer than 1,000 people. There were a couple of hundred people living in Emeryville at this time. And there were no residential neighborhoods. There were a few mansions like Joseph Emery's, and a lot of people lived in hotels. Some people lived in hotels in Butchertown and along Park Avenue, but there weren't very many people in Emeryville at that time. In the 20th century, the city started to develop. The older residential neighborhoods on the east side of town, the Triangle and the Doyle Street neighborhoods, developed starting in around 1910 or so. And then the rest of the city was big steel mills and electroplating plants and like liquid sugar here with rail spurs all over the city. So most of the city was this big, large-scale industrial stuff, with these 2 residential neighborhoods on the east side. Then, and it stayed that way for the first 2/3 of the 20th century. Then in the 1970s, things began to change. The city built the peninsula out into the bay, and decided to build well, it wasn't the city that built it, but a private developer built the Watergate apartments, which later became condominiums, 1,249 units in a single project, by far the largest residential development that had ever taken place in Emeryville, and also high-rise office buildings on the peninsula. And then in the 1980s, the Pacific Park Plaza condominiums were built. That's almost 600 units. Between Watergate and PPP, that's 1,800 units almost, which is still about more than a quarter of the city's housing stock is in these two projects. Then in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, as the industrial developments went away, they left behind these very large parcels which lent themselves to very large scale developments, either commercial or residential. So we got things like Novartis and Pixar. And then on the residential side, the old Ryerson steel mill was replaced by a 330 unit apartment building called the Courtyards. And then the rail spur one of the rail spurs became our greenway, which is a great asset. And then there are fairly large-scale residential developments on either side of that. This is the old Liquid Sugar, became the Liquid Sugar condominiums. Also, some of the old industrial buildings were kept and were converted to other uses, both non-residential and residential. The Grove Valve building was converted into the Emory Tech office building, where Cliff Bar is located today. And the Emeryville warehouse was converted to Emeryville Warehouse Lofts, which is now 1500 Park Avenue, which I'm sure you're familiar with. So it's kind of a mix of stuff, but I think the common thread through all of this is all just really large sites and large buildings. This is what Emeryville's population looks like since it was incorporated. Here's 1890, fewer than, a couple hundred people. It increased in 1910 up to about 2,600. This is when the eastern residential neighborhoods were built, and it stayed at that level for 7 decades. About 2,500 people until 1970. Then this is when Watergate was built and Pacific Park Plaza was built in the 80s, and then we've had continuous development since then. But I think it's important to note that virtually all of this development that happened since 1970 was in large buildings that had 10 or more units, and the smaller buildings were built earlier. So we wanted to see if these large buildings could help to explain our demographic and our housing characteristics. So we did what's called a regression analysis, where we looked at all of the census tracts in the Bay Area, of which there are almost 1,600. And just if you're not familiar with the regression analysis, I'm just going to do a quick primer on that, because I'm going to rely on that a lot through the rest of the presentation today, so it's important to understand it. You've probably seen these kind of charts before. This shows this. In regression analysis, you're taking two variables and trying to see if they appear to be related to each other. In this particular example, along the x-axis here, we have the percent of units that are in 10 or more unit buildings. How many of the units in a particular census tract are in big buildings? And then on the y-axis, in this particular example, we're looking at units that are 3 or more bedrooms. So what percent of total units are 3 or more bedrooms? And for each census tract, we take the percent of units in 10 or more unit buildings and the percent of units in 3 or more bedrooms, and we plot that point. So each of these blue dots represents one census tract. You then draw what's called a trend line, which is the closest fit line through the data. And the computer figures this all out. You push a button and the computer draws the trend line, right? So that's the trend line. And you also can calculate what's called a correlation coefficient. The correlation coefficient varies from 0 to 1. If it's 0, that means there's absolutely no relationship between these two variables. The dots are just random all over the place. If the correlation coefficient is 1, then that means the dots fall on a straight line. So it's perfect correlation. You're never going to have either 0 or 1. It's always going to be somewhere in between. If the relationship is negative, as it is in this case, then it's usually expressed as a negative number between 0 and 1. That means that as one variable increases, the other one decreases. There's no hard and fast rule about what constitutes a definitive correlation. It's just a matter of degree. So something like 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 would be a really high correlation. Something around 0.1 or 0.2 would be a kind of a weak correlation. This particular one that we're looking at is negative 0.53. That's a reasonably good correlation. And what this shows is that there is definitely a relationship between the number of units or the percent of units that are in large buildings as opposed to the percent of 3 or more bedroom units that you could expect. And notice that Emeryville is right on the trend line. So what this says is that if you have 71% of your units in 10 or more unit buildings, as we do, you would be expected to have about 7% 3-bedroom units. Actually, you can't see it here because it's so small, but the actual number is 6.5%. We would be expected to have 6.5%. We actually have 7. So we actually have a little bit more than would be predicted. So we did this for all of the different variables, household and dwelling unit variables. This summarizes it. Here's the correlation coefficient for each one. These are all against 10-plus unit buildings, okay? Some the correlation is higher than others. You can see for studio and 1 bedrooms and 2 or more bedrooms, the correlation is pretty high. And that would predict that Emeryville should have about 58% studio and 1 bedrooms. We have 61. It's a little bit more than we supposedly should, but it's pretty close. So for all of these, it really appears that much of our demographic and housing unit mix can be explained by the fact that we have so many big buildings. One I want to focus on in particular is families with children. So that correlation is not particularly high, but the analysis says we should have about 17.9%. We actually have 12.5%. This is the chart for that. It's not in your staff report, but I wanted to just focus on it for a minute. You can see the trend line is not real steep, so it doesn't vary a whole lot with 10 or more unit buildings, and the correlation is not particularly high. In this case, Emeryville is below the trend line. We should be up here around 17 or 18% according to this. I just want to point out a couple of things. Some people have said that in order to get families with children, you have to have single-family homes with backyards, or you have to have, Brooklyn Heights-style brownstone buildings or something like that. Certainly that it would lend itself to families with children, but the presence of a lot of large apartment and condominiums, on the other hand, it should not be a deterrent to getting families with children. As you can see, there are a number of census tracts in the Bay Area that have even more large buildings than Emeryville has that are up in the 20 to 30% range of families with children. So it's possible. So the conclusion from this analysis is, first, Emeryville's household and dwelling unit characteristics can be explained by the historical development patterns. Specifically, these characteristics are largely due to the very high percentage of units that we have in large apartment and condominium buildings. And the high percentage of large residential buildings should not be a deterrent to attracting more families with children. All right, now I want to move on to the Emeryville, Emory Unified School District enrollment levels. And I would say, just to note, that a lot of the information for this came from a report that was commissioned by the school district in 2008. That report is attachment 1 to your staff report. It was by, I'm not sure how to pronounce their names, Lapkoff and Gobelet, or Laptoff and Gobelet.
Laptoff and Gobelet.
And Gobelet? Okay, thank you. Anyway, they did this report in 2008, and a lot of this data comes from that. I also collected some data from the State Department of Education, which has a lot of data available on their websites. So this shows school district enrollments from 1981 to the present time. The blue line is the total enrollment. There, as you can see, there was a big spike in the late 1990s, and then it came back down again. The consultants were hard-pressed to explain this. They said it could have been because of an influx of interdistrict transfers or bad record keeping. It's possible that the data before this time didn't include interdistrict transfers and was only Emeryville residents, and if you included interdistrict transfers, it might have been up here. But so I don't really know why this spike was, and neither did the consultants know. But at any rate, assuming that this data does include both interdistrict transfers and Emeryville residents, you can see it started at about 600 in 81, and we're up at a little under 700 today. It's varied quite a bit. At one point, it was almost 1,000. The green line represents Emeryville residents, and the red line are interdistrict transfers. That data is not available before 2000, so that's why it's only charted after 2000. This shows that Emeryville residents around 2000 was about 600 in the schools, and then that dropped to about 400, and it's been holding pretty steady at about 400 since that time. Interdistrict transfers are a little more variable. They kind of go up and down. At various times they've been higher or lower than the number of residents in the schools. In just this past school year, we had a drop in the total enrollment. Even though there was an increase in resident enrollment, that was more than offset by a drop in interdistrict transfers, which could be explained because of the move of the high school to the Santa Fe school in Oakland. This is a similar chart that just breaks it down by grade level. So the light blue line is K through 8, which today would be Anna Yates. In past years, that would have also included the Ralph Hawley Middle School. And the purple line at the bottom is the high school. So back in 81, 82, the high school accounted for almost half, about 45%, I think, of the total enrollment. And today it's about a little over a quarter of the total enrollment. The K through 8 enrollments have increased from about 350 to about 500 today, and the high school has been declining from about 300 to a little under 200 today. The consultants did forecasts of future enrollment levels in the school district, and that again was done in 2008. These are their various forecasts using various assumptions, and they also calculated what they called a medium forecast, which is this red line here, which is what they would expect if they averaged all their forecasts together. And we have, since we're about halfway through the forecast period, which went out to 2020, we have actual data now of what the enrollment levels were between 2008 and 2014. So we've superimposed that on this chart. And as you can see, the actual enrollments have been below all of the forecasts except for this one down here. Again, they've been holding steady, and these are just residents. This is not interdistrict transfers. This is just Emeryville residents. It's been holding pretty steady at around 400. One thing that consultants noted is that the importance of test scores. The API, something performance index, academic performance index, right, thank you. And these are calculated throughout California for all of the various school districts. This chart shows the school districts in Alameda County for the last 12 years, from 2002 to 2013, which is the most recent data that's available. Emeryville is the red line. It's down at the bottom. We've been vying with Oakland and Hayward for last place for the last 12 years, and in 2013 we were in a virtual dead heat for the last place. We're actually slightly ahead. Emeryville has 722 points, and Oakland and Hayward each had 721. But I would also note that the scores in Emeryville have been improving at a faster pace than almost any other school district. So we have been, the scores have been getting better. Unfortunately, all the other school district scores have been getting better too. So we're still at the bottom, but we're gaining. I highlighted here in green San Leandro because the consultants make the point that if we want to expect any kind of an increase in school district enrollments in the future, we need to get the test scores above San Leandro. So as you can see, we've gotten pretty close in a few years, but if we can just bump it up above San Leandro and be in this range here, the consultants indicate that would help us get more students in the schools. Of course, Piedmont is up here at the top. This is what's referred to as a high-performing district, and you know, there's other Pleasanton and other cities like that. Berkeley is right here in the middle. I've been hearing for years that we need to produce more 3-bedroom units in order to attract more families with children to Emeryville, in order to get more school kids in Emeryville, in order to increase school district enrollments. This slide is just kind of a reality check on that. There is some truth to that, but it's more complicated than that. This shows data from 1990 census, 2000 census, and 2013 census, American Community Survey, compared to actual school district enrollment data for the same years. as you can see, the number of families with children in Emeryville has been increasing quite a bit over that period. The number of 3-bedroom units, again, not a huge number, but the number has been increasing from 1990 to 2000 to 2013. The number of residents who are enrolled in school in Emeryville has also been increasing. That's shown here. And the school district enrollment levels did increase quite a bit from 1990 to 2000, but then, for whatever reason, they've dropped again from 2000 to 2013 by this level. So they paralleled the increase in families with children between 1990 and 2000, but they went in exactly the opposite direction for the last 13 years. So I don't know how to explain this other than to say there's clearly not a direct relationship between these things. Now, one thing that's been said is that you can attract more families with children to Emeryville, but if the units are not affordable, the kids are most likely going to end up going to private schools. And maybe that's why the school district enrollments have dropped even while families with children have increased. The census gives us data about school enrollment, and it breaks it down by both private and public schools. So I looked at that and compared Emeryville to other cities and found that Emeryville has about 11% of its kids in private schools, which is the same as Oakland. And it's comparable to the Bay Area and the county and the state and the nation, and it's certainly much lower than Berkeley, where 21% of kids attend private schools, and San Francisco, where 25% of kids attend private schools. But if you look at the census data for kids attending public schools, and you compare that to the number of kids enrolled, Emeryville resident kids enrolled in Emeryville schools, there's a huge gap. And what that suggests is a breakdown like this, which is that we have about 11% of our kids in private school, about 58% of them attend Emory Unified School District, and about 31% are attending public schools, but not in Emeryville. So it appears that there's a good chunk of kids who are transferring out to other school districts, such as Oakland and Berkeley, maybe charter schools, maybe like my kids who lived in Oakland but transferred to Berkeley to go to Berkeley High School. So whatever. I don't know how to explain this, but it's an issue that we need to think about if we're going to try to think about increasing Emeryville school district enrollments. So the conclusion of the consultants: to increase Emory Unified School District enrollments, the school district needs to increase the test scores so they're at least above San Leandro. They also need to offer programs to increase the attractiveness of the school district. They didn't specify what those programs are, but you know, something. They didn't say, but could be. And meanwhile, the city needs to increase park space, which, you know, we have a shortage of park space. We're trying to address that. We have a general plan, and we have a Parks and Rec strategic plan that tries to get more park space. Certainly the Sherwin-Williams project is going to provide a lot more park space. If we can ever get PG&E to go away, we'll have a nice big site for a central park. Anyway, we're working on that. Providing family-friendly neighborhood shopping, which the general plan does call for 4 neighborhood centers, which are intended to be local, serving, bicycle, and pedestrian-oriented, so hopefully that would be attractive to families as those develop. We need to provide more programs for youth, which of course Community Services is doing in partnership with the school district through all of their recreation programs and ECDC. And we need to provide more family-friendly housing. So family-friendly housing is definitely a part of this mix, but it's not the whole thing. It's part of a larger strategy that includes all this other stuff. So to get to unit mix, we need, if we're going to write regulations, we need to have some numbers. And in order, you can't just pull numbers out of the air. You have to have some basis for the numbers that you arrived at. The consultants for the school district didn't really look at 2 and 3 bedroom units or even square footage of units or anything like that. What they looked at is something called student yield. And student yield is the number of students that would be expected to be produced per dwelling unit. So 0.07, for example, 0.07 to 0.08, which is the current level of student yield, means about 7 to 8 students per 100 dwelling units. For each of their forecasts, the consultants had 3 different alternatives, which they called 0, 1, and 2. Alternative 0 is no change, and that's a yield of 0.07 to 0.08. Alternative 1 is where the test scores get up above San Leandro, Hayward, and Oakland, and that they would say a student yield of about 0.11 could be anticipated. Alternative 2 is where the test scores are similar to those of the high-performing districts such as Piedmont, which is probably not realistic to expect, at least in the near future. And that would result in student yields of 0.18 to 0.19. Now, comparing these numbers to the current student yield, the alternative 1 is a 60% increase roughly, and alternative 2 is about 100 to 140% increase. We know we have 12.5% families with children now. If we increase that by 60%, as alternative 1 would suggest, that would suggest we should have about 20% families with children. And if we increase it by the alternative 2 amounts, that would suggest 25 to 30% families with children. Staff feels that this level is probably not attainable, at least anytime soon. This level here, 20% families with children, is probably realistic, and perhaps we should focus on that. And in order to take a look at that and see how that relates to bedroom count, first we wanted to just confirm that there in fact is a relationship between bedroom count and families with children. It seems intuitive that there would be. So we did this regression analysis for all the census tracts in the Bay Area on average bedrooms per unit versus families with children, and it does show a moderate correlation of about 0.32. As number of bedrooms increases, on average, the percent of families with children, of course, also increases. Emeryville is a little below the trend line here. This would suggest if we want 20% families with children, we need about an average of about 1.5 bedrooms per unit. Now, looking specifically at 2 and 3 bedroom units, this is the chart for 2 or more bedrooms. So it includes 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 bedroom units, anything with 2 or more bedrooms. The correlation there is 0.33, which is a fairly decent correlation. And what this suggests is if we're down here now, if we want 20% families with children here, there, you go across to the trend line here, and then you drop that down to the x-axis, and that suggests you need about 50% 2 or more bedroom units to get 20% families with children. We also looked at 3 or more bedroom units. The correlation, as you can see here, is not quite as strong, but there is a correlation, apparently. We would suggest that both 2 and 3 bedroom units are important to look at for family-friendly housing. A lot of families don't need 3 bedrooms. They may not be able to afford 3 bedrooms. You have single parents with 1 kid, or even a couple with 1 kid, or even a couple with 2 kids if they're little kids, or if they're of the same gender, could share a bedroom. They might not be able to afford a 3-bedroom unit, so we think it's important to look at both. But in terms of the 3-bedroom units, to do the same thing, 20% families with children, take that across to the trend line and drop it down to the x-axis, and that gives you 10%. So what this suggests is 10% 3 or more bedroom units and 50% 2 or more bedroom units in order to achieve 20% families with children. So this summarizes that. That's this line right here. We also looked at 25 and 30% families with children, and that gives you, of course, higher percentages of 2 and 3 bedroom units down here. And our current numbers are here in the first line. I want to point out one thing, though. The 50% 2 or more bedroom units includes the 10% 3 or more bedroom units, because 2 or more bedrooms includes 3 or more bedrooms, right? So you don't add these together and get 60%. This could be 40% 2 bedroom and 10% 3 bedroom would meet these numbers. Okay, so that's the numbers we've arrived at from that analysis for 2 and 3 bedroom units. In terms of unit size, I'm afraid staff does not have any real firm recommendations for you. We looked at the buildings built in the last 20 years, the ones I summarized at the beginning of the presentation, and this is the average unit sizes for those buildings. In the family-friendly design guidelines that were presented to the Planning Commission in February, we suggested a minimum 2-bedroom size of 900 square feet and 3-bedroom size of 1,100 square feet. One of the speakers at that meeting said that these numbers were higher than affordable housing funders like to see, and it might be difficult to get funding for affordable housing if you require a minimum size of that. So in the April guidelines that were just recently adopted or approved by the Planning Commission, we've dropped a minimum size, but we do have example units. We have undesirable examples and desirable examples, and we do have square footages for those. These are the undesirable examples, and they're not undesirable because of the size of the units. They're undesirable for other reasons, but this is how the numbers shake out for those, and these are the numbers for the desirable units. I would suggest that compliance with the family-friendly design guidelines is kind of going to be a de facto minimum unit size, because you're going to have a certain size living room, a certain size dining room, wide hallways for the kids to play, things like that. You're going to end up with a certain minimum size, even if you don't say what that number is. Santa Cruz does have minimum sizes for their affordable housing, and as you can see, these are the numbers down here. They are lower than what we suggested in our February guidelines. They're also considerably lower than the average size of units that have been developed over the last 20 years. So we don't know that minimum unit size is necessarily needed. We sort of feel like if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It hasn't really been a problem in search of a solution. But if the Commission and Council feel that we need to establish minimum unit sizes, by all means, we can certainly look at that further. Now, just to touch briefly on the family-friendly design guidelines, as I said, these are in the works. They're on a parallel track. They have been approved by the Planning Commission. They'll be coming to the Council for approval on May 19th. Actually, that's what these things say, so I won't belabor that. I just want to give you a brief summary, just so you have the context of what the family-friendly design guidelines are all about. The design guidelines actually have both for all residential projects as well as for family-friendly projects. And in both categories, they have site and building design guidelines as well as individual unit design guidelines. I'm just going to show you some examples of a few of those guidelines. This is by no means all of them. There are quite a few more. So for family-friendly, for site and building design, we have provide units with 2, 3, or more bedrooms. That seems intuitive. Provide ample exterior play areas that are visible from the units, and provide in-unit laundries or common laundry areas where people can gather. For the unit designs, one of the key points is provide only one master suite. You don't want multiple master suites in a family unit. Separate the living areas from the sleeping areas from the living areas. The dining and living areas should both have ample room for all household members to gather, and there should be hallways wide enough for children to play. The guidelines include a number of illustrations. I've just shown a couple of them here of an undesirable unit and a desirable unit. This is an example. These are both 2-bedroom. This is an example of an undesirable one. As you can see, it has 2 master suites. The bedroom enters directly from the living area. There's no foyer. The front door enters directly into the kitchen. There's no hallway. There's no balcony. The dining table is cramped, and it blocks access to the living area. There's no play or study area, etc., etc. This is an example of a more desirable unit. It has 1 master suite and then a separate bedroom with a separate bath across the hall. There's a wide hallway here where children can play. There's an entrance foyer, so you have a transition space, and there's storage in the foyer for strollers and things like that. The dining and living areas are separated, and although there's no wall between them, each of them is large enough for the entire family to gather. There is a balcony out here, and so forth. So those are just quick comparisons of undesirable and desirable in terms of family-friendly. So that covers it, and now we have some questions that we'd like the Commission and Council to discuss. First, should a minimum percentage of 2 or more bedroom and or 3 or more bedrooms be required in new multi-unit residential development? And if so, what should that percentage be? Staff has made a recommendation on that. Should 2 or more bedroom units, including 3 or more bedroom units, be required to comply with the family-friendly design guidelines? If so, should that requirement only apply to the units that are actually required? Or should it also apply to any additional units that the developer may choose to provide? In other words, if the developer meets their requirement for 2 and 3 bedroom units that are family friendly, could they be allowed to provide some additional 2-bedroom units that maybe are not family friendly, that maybe have 2 master suites if they want to, as long as they've met their family friendly requirement? So that's a question for you. Should we have minimum unit sizes? And if so, what should they be? should there be any exceptions to these requirements? And if so, what should be the basis for such an exception? Those are our discussion questions. And at this point, I would like to open it to the Commission and Council for any clarifying questions you may have.
Is there going to be a chance for the public to ask questions?
Yes, there will.
Okay, when will that be?
After the Commission and Council's clarifying questions.
Charlie,
Yes,
just
Dawn.
to frame the discussion, I know you have provided the staff recommendations, but very briefly, can you go, or can you either put up there or go down the list of the staff recommendation? The Planning Commission and the staff has spent an enormous amount of time on this issue, and you've done an awful lot of the scut work, the really hard work. It would help me if we had your recommendations up there, just to frame the discussion.
Okay.
This is what you have arrived at after many months and much intensive work. So let's get a sense of that, what the staff recommendations are.
Well, in terms of mix, we would recommend 50% 2 or more bedroom units, which would include 10 or more 3-bedroom units, 10% or more 3-bedroom units. We don't have a recommendation on minimum unit sizes. The family-friendly guidelines are in process. You can certainly, I would say, I mean, we didn't say this in the staff report, but I would say we would recommend that these 50% and 10% units be required to comply with the family-friendly guidelines. As I say, we don't have a recommendation on minimum unit size. The family-friendly guidelines are in process. And, okay, oops. In terms of the exceptions, I would say staff is agnostic about that. I mean, I personally can't think of any justification for any exceptions, but developers always come up with reasons why they can't do these things. And there may be some legitimate reason why a developer should not be held to these requirements, but I personally, I can't think of what that would be.
Charlie, what about a process to, not saying that exceptions are going to be made, but at least a process for people who are looking for exceptions to follow?
Well, we could certainly establish a conditional use permit to allow exceptions to these requirements with the finding that the Planning Commission or Council, as the case may be, must be convinced that it's legitimate, you know, that the developer has made a convincing case as to why they shouldn't be held to these. We can write that in if that's the pleasure of the Commission and Council. And it doesn't have to be real specific. It just says that they have to prove their case. They have to prove their case, right. We could include that if you wish. Any other questions? Yes, Scott.
This is a question about parcel size. I noticed you have not looked at that as an issue, but you know, it seems to me that it's true that the bigger the building, we tend to get less family-friendly units by the nature of the structures. Currently, yes, we could address that. But is there also a relationship between parcel size and family-friendly or family housing? For example, in the development world, there are less developers who are capable of doing large projects, and in effect, you have less competition to approach a particular site. The marketplace is smaller inherently, the bigger it is. Should the city look at parcel size in relation to this issue? If we had smaller parcels, you know, this is a question really for experts more than myself, but you know, just looking at it from a bird's eye view, maybe that could affect this, and maybe something about our zoning might be addressed about this.
Well, that's certainly something to consider. I mean, the census doesn't provide data on parcel size, so you have to kind of back into it. But I think it's reasonable to assume that a 10 or more unit building is probably going to be on a bigger parcel than a single-family home, for example. So you could use number of units in a structure as sort of as a surrogate for parcel size, but we don't have that. We don't have data on parcel sizes themselves, but that's something that could be considered. Any other questions from the Commissioner Council? Sean? And then Gail?
I was a little puzzled, as I think you were too, by the pie chart about enrollment in the school district, and I was trying to account kind of for the third, the almost a third of Emeryville children that were enrolled in public school but not here. I was wondering if that would include children who were homeschooled. Like, is that considered a public school? And maybe also children that were, for one reason or another, couldn't be accounted for and enrolled anywhere, kind of thing.
Perhaps, I don't know. I mean, the Census Bureau, they break down the enrollment in schools all kinds of different ways, but one of the categories is not homeschooled. I didn't see that in there in any of the census data, so I don't know how they count homeschool kids. I don't know. I would think they would consider that public, but I'm not sure. Do you know, Jack?
Some people have to sign up through a district in order to...
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Yeah, some people have to sign up through a district in order to be certified to do homeschooling. The other thing, I'm asking about the pie chart as well, Sean. Thinking about this, it would be useful to know the age breakdown and where we start getting attrition in terms of people turning outside of the district to enroll their kids.
I can try to figure that out.
Right?
I think this,
because I mean, we can look at EUSD and the current enrollment numbers, and certainly we have a larger population of folks in K through 5, and then we see lower and lower yields as people move up through the grades. So I would actually suspect that this has to do with not just API scores, but also programming and critical mass, because when kids are in middle school, if you don't have enough kids for a softball team or for electives, right, the people will start turning away from the district, and we do have a lot more programming for the lower grades than we do for the higher ones. Yeah. So that would be interesting to me to know if that's in fact true.
Okay.
Right? If it's what we're seeing is that families with older children are looking outside of the district, but still at public school.
Okay, I can try to see if I can extract that from the data. Gail, you had a question?
Well, my question was along those lines too, and I was wondering if there's age data when the census does those figures, whether they're looking at kids 5 and over, or is it that we have a lot of young families that have kids and they're listed as having kids when the kids are 1, 2, 3 years old, and then they move out?
These are... This is not based on age. This is based on the grade that the students are enrolled in.
Okay.
So it has how many residents of Emeryville are enrolled in grades K through 5 or whatever, regardless of how old they may be.
But does that also track when you're looking at the total number of families with children? So is our 12% by that pie chart?
Well, it's similar data, but it's not exactly the same data. I mean, the number of kids under 18 and the number of kids enrolled in school may be a little bit different, because some of the kids under 18 may not be enrolled in school. Some of the kids enrolled in school may be over 18. But the data I looked at was specifically about kids enrolled in school, regardless of age. So I think Kyrie had a question, and then Ruth.
I was just going to suggest that you check with Shelley Lapkoff, because I know that she studied that exact question for San Francisco Unified School District. So I'd worked with her 10 years ago.
That's the Lapkoff of
yes.
Lapkoff and Gulf.
So she
okay.
would, I remember from reading that demographic study that she did 11 years ago that it was definitely something that you saw in San Francisco specifically, that in middle school, that's when they were exiting the district. So I would check with her.
Okay. Ruth?
This wasn't exactly asked, but I would be interested to know if there are preschoolers, and so families that are just starting out, and by the time they hit public school, maybe they move or they make other choices. So it'd be good to know how many 0 through age 4 or 5 children live in Emeryville specifically, and then to see if the parents are making some kind of choices once school starts.
Right. The census data does include preschool. It also includes college. I only looked at K through 12 because that's what Emory Unified School District has. We can get data on how many kids in Emeryville are enrolled in preschool. I'm not quite sure what to do with that number, but we can certainly get it. Any further questions from the Commission and Council? Brad?
I mean, in looking at these trends, I guess the question comes to mind, it seems like we're in a little bit of a catch-22, and that the only way to really move forward is this sort of incremental movement. And I'm wondering if there's any analysis that we can do to look into means that might buck the trend, whether that's alternative pedagogy or you know, I mean, maybe we're already starting down that path with the ECCL, but you know, if we're just dependent upon little incremental changes to try to get a little bit better than San Leandro, then you know, it feels a little helpless. And so I'm just wondering if are there big picture sort of moves that we could make that might help buck the trend and give us a competitive advantage in that regard. So I'm just...
In terms of school district enrollment?
Yes,
yeah, I think that's really a question for Shelley Lapkoff probably and those consultants.
Sure.
I mean, they said programs to increase the school district's attractiveness, but they didn't say what that is. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure they would have ideas about that. Yes, Jack? Oh.
A couple of
Nora.
things that I have been thinking about or want to consider. It was really interesting to me, I think it was page maybe 19, that...
of the PowerPoint?
Of the staff report.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Where you talk about, this chart illustrates that in general, the percentage of families with children is likely to increase as the percentage of units with 2 or more bedrooms increases up to about 36% families with children when all units have 2 or more bedrooms. I think that so that we see an increase in families with children when you have 2 or more bedrooms in
Right.
these multifamily units. I think one of the things that's happening there is that you achieve a kind of critical mass at which it feels visibly family friendly to people, that they're around other families. And this is something that the school district, in terms of the numbers, right? I think actually there could be or will be a point at which when you achieve that critical mass, right? So a group of parents or a cohort willing to make the jump from 5th grade to 6th grade, right? That then things will start trending very differently, right? But it takes a large base and population of students to work with. It takes the buildup of community and programs really at the 5th grade level for people to kind of make that jump and make that commitment. And so I think that the school district is, in some ways, this same kind of logic would operate there. Once people start seeing that you have enough families to constitute a cohort and to move up together, then we'll start seeing a difference in the schools. And really, I mean, the API scores, they map directly onto SES, onto social, and economic status. This is why Piedmont, right? I mean, it's just tracking wealth, right? And we serve a lot of high need students in our district. So you have to have folks who, in some ways, are the folks who are super concerned about the API scores. I don't know. Will also be considering private schools for a lot of reasons. So API matters, but I also think programming matters and critical mass matters.
Nora, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to kind of ground the discussion here. we are the Planning Commission and the City Council, and we have a definitive task before us, established by law. We certainly, all of us, have worked in various capacities to aid and assist the school district, and we work with them closely. But when I look at this, we could spend a lot of time talking about the school district and how to get the APIs up and how to enhance the school district so people would come. I believe that our function here is to provide the infrastructure, not set it aside from the school district. We as the Planning Commission and the City Council have the ability to provide the basic infrastructure to attract families. Not to say that the families are going to fill all these units. We all know about the grad students, 5 and 6 of them splitting the rent. But at least we're providing the infrastructure. So I would hope as the discussion continues, we focus more on what these two bodies can do and how we can do it in an effective manner and in a reasonably timely manner. The school district problem, I don't believe, can be solved by these two bodies here.
So I want to focus on clarifying questions. We'll come back to deliberation after we have public comment. So, Kyrie, you have a question?
Yeah, I was told recently that Atlanta has really strict regulations about the number of adults and children that are allowed legally to occupy certain sizes of units. Do we have similar restrictions here? And I was a bit surprised about it, but well, yeah, it was interesting. But in any case, I didn't confirm that was the case, but do we have restrictions on the number of people that can occupy certain sizes of units? And it sounds like we don't.
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there's the housing code that talks about overcrowding, but I don't know. City Attorney, are you familiar with any such regulations? I don't know. I don't believe there are.
There are. I am aware of codes in different cities. I mean, typically in California, you find them like in college towns that restrict the number of unrelated people living in a unit together.
Oh, I don't think that's legal in California anyway.
Berkeley has it. I was just reading something in Daily Cal.
They restrict the number of unrelated people living together?
Yes, and they're actually looking at updating it. It's in the Daily Cal.
The mini dorm issue?
The mini dorm issue and the fraternities. There's a lawsuit. A neighbor is suing the fraternities.
He's not going with that. Yeah.
Okay, that may be a special case. I don't know.
Can we hear from the public?
Yes, certainly. Are there any further questions from the Council or Commission? All right. 3 minutes per speaker. Roving mic will be coming to you. You can optionally sign in on the clipboard after you've spoken if you wish. So, Mr. Donahue.
Okay. First, I wanted to say that I wanted to note that nobody from the school district here. Nobody. That's pretty telling. I'm kind of surprised they weren't invited, first of all. They should have been invited. But on top of that, they should have had the wherewithal to come on their own even without being invited. So it's pretty disappointing that nobody from the school district is here. Okay, I wanted to talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room here is the private versus public partnership that we need to have to develop our city. And what we're going to need to start doing from now on, which we've never done in this town, and that is we're going to have to start saying no to developers who come with their projects to our town. Because we know what saying yes delivers, and it delivers the town that we have. And Mr. Bryant here just told us the town that we have is not the town that we want. So we're going to have to start saying no to developers. That's all there is to it. And I wanted to mention that the presentation that was just given, there's a lot of data, seemed to be a lot of massaging of numbers and a lot of hand washing, and it seems like what we're being told here by Mr. Bryan is we just need to tweak around the edges a little bit, let the developers bring their projects, and we tweak a little bit, but the fault really lies with the API scores in the school district, and to that I say bunk. I say we have to start delivering family-friendly housing by saying no to developers. And then the most important way to do that, I believe, and it's counter to what Mr. Bryant said, is families with young children want and need private little backyard spaces. And we can do that in an urban context, contrary to what Mr. Bryant was saying, by making townhouses with little private backyards so families can go about doing their chores, the mother and father, what have you, and without watching their child every second. We know this because that's why families go to the suburbs. We're not the suburbs, though. We need more density in that. So what we do is we have developers deliver us these townhouses, and then to have it, quote, pencil out for the developers, they can build a tower above the townhouse with market rate apartments if they want. And that's how we can deliver townhouses that are actually family friendly because they have a little backyard, which families want and need, and then have developers be able to afford to be able to build them for us. So I take issue with Mr. Bryant's poo-pooing of the small backyards being something that families want or need. And I rest my case by just saying, look out at the suburbs. Are suburbs filled with families? And the answer is yes, they are. And a big reason they are private backyards. Now, we're building a lot of podium condominiums or what have you, apartments with common areas with playground equipment. And so you take your children, you go down the hall to the common area, and then you sit there while your child plays. Then you have to watch your child, and that's not what families want. Thank you.
Any other public comments? Oh, okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Crystal. I'm a first-time homeowner in Emeryville, and I'm here because I'm very excited to learn about the city and hopefully make it a home eventually. So I just bought a house by myself, and in the next 5 years, the most important question on my mind is if I'm gonna stay at this house, I'm gonna get married and have children and make Emeryville my home. And I thank you for all the information, in the presentation. It's, really informative to my decision for the next few years. I do want to say that, I talk with my boyfriend. The question that inside our house is looking at the neighborhood, like, is this where we want to raise our kids? And one negative thing that keeps coming up is what deters us from living here, having a family here long term, is that we see a lot of these multi-unit, and not just like 50 units, 100 units, there are 300, 400 units. And to us, we feel like these are like walled off fortresses, and when I have kids, they're young kids, like 5-year-old, 6-year-old, I wouldn't feel comfortable, walking with them, because it just feels like people go back to their, fortresses, and there's not a lot of real estate for public to walk outside, enjoy the city. So I just want to say that a little bit, and again, thank you all for your time and those information. It's really nice to be here.
Let's see, we have one over here and then one over here. So, yeah, this side first. No, this side first. John. Yeah.
I just wanted to speak to the interrelationship of two issues we're talking about. One is the composition of family size, or the type of family we have, and the affordability issue. There was some conversation about how do we incentivize families if you build a 2 or 3 bedroom unit? How do you make sure those don't go to college students or friends? And if you actually have, this is one of the damning things about losing inclusionary zoning in rental property, but the low-income state housing tax credit rules actually answer that issue for you. You can't put into a tax credit subsidized unit with the low-income housing tax credit unrelated people. In that capacity. And so what happens is that for a 2 or 3 bedroom unit that's built affordably with low-income housing tax credits, you actually achieve the result of putting a family in that unit. And so you address the issue of not being able to otherwise zone or regulate who can go into the unit like you can in a for-profit or market rate unit, simply by adding affordable units to it. So I think this is important to address now as you go into the next part of the conversation, because they're not mutually exclusive issues. Development of affordable units is necessary, but that can be, and you can achieve the outcome that you're talking about here of increasing family friendliness by actually requiring or incentivizing in the ways that are legal the inclusion of affordable units in these buildings that are developed. The only other thing I'd say to the comments about restrictions on how many people are in a building or who's living in there or how many children and whatnot, federally subsidized properties, especially voucher programs or 202s or other types of buildings, they actually have guidelines as to who may be, how many people qualify for what size of bedroom. So that may be where that idea came from. For example, there are different constellations of family composition, whether those are multiple adults or children, and those constellations, depending on the ages of the people in the property and their genders, met out to what size of bedroom they're eligible for when they live in a subsidized unit. And so there are structures that inside those federal guidelines come out like that. There are also local zoning regulations that are usually safety code or building code regulations to basically deter squatting or other types of substandard housing occupancy that are aligned around non-familial mutual housing. So in other words, not having 10 unrelated people living in a one-bedroom unit, even if it's owned by one person for the purpose of, because it's not a family under a legal definition, not equating to substandard housing. So I think that's where some of those things may come from. I'm not familiar, it would be illegal to actually dictate whether children can or can't live or how many children you may have in a building, with the exception being that the bedroom size in federally standard or subsidized buildings are standardized. So that's my comments on that.
And could the speakers at your option identify yourselves, please?
Hi, my name is Tim Curran. I'm an Emeryville resident, and I have a daughter who's 7 years old. And I've been here for many years and seen the development of Emeryville over the years. And I've seen the development of the big box architecture. I've seen Pixar come in and the rest of it. Presently, as Nora said, the infrastructure is something that we could focus on to provide a community and an environment in which families could have their children. But the present system, whatever you have working, whether it's the bonus system or whatnot, has produced what we have today, which is very, very stingy on public benefits. And we might have a gated campus across the street that's very beautiful and has a soccer field that no one can use. We might have a park system which is has some pluses, but also is very could use some improvement. And we have some developments coming up, which are examples. Charlie mentioned that, quote, Sherwin-Williams will surely provide more park space as one of the solutions. Well, that's not true. Sherwin-Williams will incorporate public property into their development. And in doing so, they'll receive bonus points for this. And in doing so, they'll increase the density and probably diminish the asset of the city and make that park space probably less desirable to me and my family. So I would urge the council and the Planning Commission to really review these incentives and how easy they are to get and what they produce. They produce corporations and housing developers who come in and take advantage of these wonderful incentives very easily. You have 30% of the incentives on the bonus program, 19 categories. 30% of those are 50 points. That means you can get two of those categories satisfied, and you can kind of build the density and intensity up to the maximum levels. So what I'm saying is that this ease of getting through your regulations, your incentives, this ease has produced what we have today. And this is kind of, Emeryville for families is kind of an embarrassment. When I take my child to Berkeley, to a private school, and we talk to other parents, they are kind of embarrassed about the environment that I raise my child in. They don't see it as a very child-friendly place for many reasons, and it's not the size of the bedrooms. That's a whole nother issue. It's not about the situation that's going on with backyards. It's an aggregate situation. So the infrastructure that Nora mentioned over the many years that I've lived here has produced what we've gotten in Emeryville today.
I would just like to respond to a couple of those points. I saw a lot of heads nodding, so I just want to clarify a couple of things. One is that virtually none of the development that you see in Emeryville today is because of our bonus system. That bonus system has only been in place for a couple of years, and we have hardly had any developments that have used that bonus system that have actually been built yet. So that's not the reason why the city is the way it is today. Second, with relation to Sherwin-Williams, their private property, about a third of it or more is zoned open space. They are required to provide public open space on their private property because of the zoning, and they will not get any bonus points for that. That's just a base requirement. So just to clarify that. And we'll talk more about the bonus system this afternoon. Any further public comments? Yes.
Judy Timmel, I'm a resident. So on page 18, the conclusion that is, it's talking about 10 plus unit buildings, and the conclusion was that large buildings contribute to the situation that we have now. So I'd like to reiterate what Scott Donahue just said about the fact that it's the size of the building, and this resident here just said that the huge blocks of condos were intimidating and unattractive to them as a potential future family in Emeryville. So I would like to reiterate that zoning is really crucial here. In terms of family-friendly open space, I do live in co-housing, so my views are skewed, but I don't believe it's necessary for everybody to have their own little backyard. And in fact, I think it's anti-community. I think for very young children, a small space where they can play outside, a little porch or deck or something is sufficient. But I do think that kids really like to play with each other, and that communal spaces that are safe and that are visible from the residential unit is sufficient and desirable.
Any further public comments? Jennifer.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jennifer West. I just want to say that I'm so pleased to see the staff analysis and the depth of this analysis, because I think it really makes it very easy for the Planning Commission and City Council to make good choices and direction. And so I want to applaud the information that you've provided. And I see as a goal, it's really about achieving some kind of balance. It seems that with the development over the last 20 years, it swung directly towards studios and one bedrooms, and that's what we have today. That's what we are dealing with. But to add to that current housing stock, we may need to compensate. That if we want to get to that 20-50 balance, as Charlie mentioned, if we want 50% of units to be 2 bedrooms plus, well, how much would we have to add to get there? It's not actually just adding 50% in new dwellings. So to think about that as well. And I want to say in general, I don't think we should be afraid of density. I think density brings lots of good things to our town, including better transportation, better open space, and that kind of interaction. I totally want to echo the fortress comment that was made. I think by walling off our communities, we are not doing ourselves a service. And we may think that when inside those fortresses, people are getting along great and having good community, but that's not always the case. People don't necessarily know their neighbors unless there's a deliberate design element, which we've addressed somewhat in the design guidelines, I think. So good work, and look forward to seeing what comes of this.
Any further public comments?
Can I make a second comment? 1 minute?
What do you think? We allow that?
If there's no one else who hasn't spoken.
All right. Anybody else who hasn't spoken?
Once.
Want to make a comment? All right, one further comment.
Less than 1 minute.
Less than 1 minute.
Okay, everybody here should recognize really what we're talking about are 3 spaces. Really, that's all we're talking about. We're talking about the Sherwin-Williams development proposal, we're talking about the Marketplace development proposal, and we're talking about the Nady site up on near the freeway near Berkeley. So it's really only 3 sites that have any consequence here. So when we're talking today, everyone should recognize that's what we're talking about. Nady, we're talking about public market, and we're talking about Sherwin-Williams. So when we go about trying to, formulate public policy regarding family-friendly housing, remember, it's 3 sites. And I agree, I want to say I agree with Ms. West here when she said we need to catch up. So we got to better make sure these last 3 sites that in our lifetimes that are going to be developed are going to catch us up to where we want to be, rather than just simply add some family friendliness. We need to catch up to where we should be. Thank you.
Charlie, if I may, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to have to publicly disagree with Mr. Donahue. We have 3 vacant sites that are under consideration right now, but in my neighborhood at Powell and Christie, we're also looking at the site where the 76 gas station is, called the Gateway Project. That's a whole project that could be totally densified. Our general plan states that Powell Street Plaza could also be redeveloped into a much denser place. We might even carry the street through that development. And then there's also the whole East Bay Bridge Shopping Center. That huge site there could totally be redeveloped. So our city isn't built out. And what we're doing in looking at those projects is we're looking at very expensive sites. So that brings us up to 6 for a city of 1.6 or 1.2 square miles. I think we have a lot of opportunities here that we need to, and these laws that we're looking at enacting are going to have impacts on all kinds of different sites. So that's not a total accurate statement.
And there will, let us not have a discussion between the Commission, Council, and the audience, please. Okay, if there's no further public comment, there's,
Brian Donahue?
well, I guess we'll give you 1 minute.
Thanks. The other comment that I failed to say was about our school district and how they're not at the table today, and that's unfortunate. I agree, because I feel like what we're talking about directly is affected by their actions and also impacts their decisions. So I would applaud the city for having some kind of a summit that could talk with them as well. And we these bodies do not have a say over what happens with the school district, and a lot of what we're discussing here I think is directly correlated with the quality of education, and yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you. Any
Charlie,
further? Yes.
Does staff feel like they have received adequate input and direction?
Well, we haven't had the council and commission deliberation yet.
I just want to make sure we don't walk away without...
No, we're not done.
We're
We're not done. So any other public comment from anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Going once, going twice? Okay, let's bring it back to the commission and council for your deliberations. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. What the hell? We've all spent a lot of time on this. There's been a lot of discussion on this. I want to commend the staff for the excellent analysis and the work that they have provided for us. I think their recommendations, on balance, are good recommendations and will provide a basis to move forward. So I would propose that the council and the planning commission support the staff recommendation on these issues.
All right, anybody else?
I would like to support that square footage we can be agnostic about when it comes to this, partly because I've seen many spaces really livable if done right at a smaller scale.
Right.
It really depends on design. Design matters is what I'm trying to say. So, you know, the minimum size, we don't have to, I don't think, worry too much about that.
That was a staff recommendation, right? To be agnostic?
Basically, yeah. Or I should, well, we don't have a recommendation on that issue, put it that way.
If I'll go ahead and go next. On the discussion questions, should the minimum percentage of 2 or 3 bedrooms units be required? I'm okay with that. The concern I have is what we'll discuss farther on in today's discussion is I might have a concern with that being 50% or more 2-bedroom units if we go along with an affordability requirement for bonus points. So if we're going to require that affordable units be put into a unit or a development before they can earn bonus points, then I think that number might be a little difficult to achieve in terms of cost. So I just wanted to give that to everyone's mind, so when we get into that further today, we can talk about that, see what we agree or disagree with. I think the 2-bedroom plus units being family friendly should only be required to the number of units that are needed for family-friendly. And the reason I say that is because projects are difficult, and a lot of our lots are constrained. And I think this could stymie creativity. We could lose the ability to have some really interesting living places for someone who wants a 2-bedroom unit that's not necessarily family-friendly. So I think what we might want to look at is making the number of units family-friendly that meet with the current guidelines. Not every unit in a development should be all family-friendly. Should the minimum unit size, I agree with Councilmember Donahue that we should go with the staff recommendation and remain indifferent about that. And I'm still questioning, should there be an exception to the requirements? I think maybe that might have to be on a case-by-case basis. I agree with Nora, and I've often been saying along with them, I think the 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom plus is an important factor in bringing in families. I think we need to maintain a balance of that. We need to look at that in a realistic fashion, but it is a consideration. But beyond that, we need to look at our city itself, because as I've stated many times before, I've talked to 3 new professors coming to UC Berkeley. I've asked them if they have looked at Emeryville. They never ask about our unit size. Invariably, they always ask about things, city amenities, things we can control. How are our schools? Where do my kids play? And do I have a safe community? So I think the city amenity part is very important for us, probably as equally important as units, numbers of bedrooms, if not more important. And I just have a question on the state regs. When Mr. Bowder was talking about the state funds, that the units used for those funds be related occupants. Is that in any affordable unit, even if it's a mixed, or is that only in affordable complexes like the Ambassador?
Catherine, can you respond to that?
So our BMRs that were created by the inclusionary housing, we have rules about occupancy. Maximum occupancy is basically based on the housing code. We don't have a special code for how many people can live in it. We just use the housing code, and I actually have to do that fairly often. When households are applying for units, I have to check to make sure that the household isn't too big for the unit that's provided.
Well, more than the size, I'm worried about the funding. If the state is providing funding for these people, and it's controlled that it has to be a family unit, non-related people, is that only in developments that are all affordable, or does that law also apply to just affordable units within a mixed-use, affordable market rate building?
It's quite rare for there to be that situation. It applies to the units that are funded by the state.
In any development?
In any development they're funded. But so, like for instance, Bridgecourt has state funding in 40% of their units. That rule would only be in those units that are actually funded, that wouldn't apply to the market rate units themselves.
Okay, very good. That's all I have for now.
Jack?
So in terms of the questions that we have in front of us, the minimum percentage of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms, like Stephen, my response to that is kind of contingent at this point, but my inclination is that we need to push and compensate, like Jennifer West is talking about, that maybe we need to think about a higher percentage than 50 in order to reach a tipping point and a critical mass for families in town. The other thing that I'm thinking about in terms of the family-friendly guidelines is that when I think about those and whether or not they should be applied to every 2 and 3 bedroom unit, I think yes. I think we should think about them almost in terms of universal design, so that there's no matter who is living in that space, right? Because we can't predict that, as we've said, and we can't control that. That it would be friendly and accessible and useful to any kind of family formation, right? Whether that's adults or whether that's children. So I prefer to look at those almost like universal design, and I think they should apply to all the 2 and 3 bedroom units. The minimum unit sizes, I would be willing to go along with being agnostic on that right now. In terms of the exceptions, I want to hear from other folks about what that process or procedure would look like, whether the exceptions would come to Planning Commission first or straight to council, but am willing to listen to and hope to hear from other people on that first.
Diane, did you have your hand up?
I did. As for the minimum percentage of 2 and 3 bedroom, I'm of the mind that I'd like to see numbers as to what we would need to do to compensate.
Okay.
I'm fine with remaining agnostic on size of units, and as Jack stated, I'm willing to listen to what process for exceptions would be and what types of exceptions would be allowed. And I just wanted to echo some other sentiments that I heard today, that I would agree that a summit or a meeting with EUSD is in order. I think looking at the number of public school students that are exiting and going to other schools in other districts, or at least what it looks like by this pie chart, this is an alarming number to me. And you know, it's one thing to try to figure out what's the causation, what's the correlation, but it, you know, as Mr. Curran pointed out, we have an aggregate problem, and we all need to work together to make our community better and all be heading in the same direction. So I think it would be helpful for the school district and helpful for the Planning Commission and helpful for City Council to go forward on the same path.
Brad.
Yeah, it's fun. When I started looking at the packet, I just started digging in before I looked at the agenda, and I immediately started writing a list of kind of all the different components that I thought were involved in this issue, and I had six items listed, and we're really addressing 3 of them, I think, today: the family-friendly design guidelines, affordable housing stock, and ownership. And the education, community amenities, community pride were 3 items that we're told not to be addressing today, or that these aren't really on the agenda. And so I would love to see a summit that addresses those as well, because I feel like those are all key components and they're all intertwined. And so another summit, I don't want to give up another Saturday.
Could you repeat those 3?
Well, these are mine: education, community amenities, community pride. Community pride might be a little nebulous, but then back to, I know we'll be addressing the affordable housing and ownership in the second half of our day, but to go to the family-friendly housing design, I do think that we should make a lot of the guidelines required, including the unit mix. I don't know about the 10-50. The 10 for 3 bedrooms seems sufficient to me. I don't know about the 50 for 2s and up. I do think that we need to look at revamping the bonus point system, and not, and as part of that, the family-friendly component. I think right now, the way that the bonus point system is set up, that we're giving developers a lot of bonus points for things that they would likely do anyway. I mean, and there are a lot of these also that we could require. I mean, there are cities that require LEED Silver, whereas we give 10 bonus points for it. We give bonus points for a lot of energy efficiency, water efficiency, open space, a lot of items that we could easily just require, and start putting more emphasis on the family-friendly components of the design, and the bonus points that those provide. And then, I like Judy, live in co-housing, where we own a condo. It's a 12-unit condo development, and I think 8 of the 12 households there have children or have had children who are now adult age. And so I think there is a lot to be said for how community-focused the development is, and how manageable it feels for families. And so I don't know if it is about everyone having our own little backyard, but I honestly don't believe that's the case, but I do believe that it involves creating manageable size community environments, and that gets into the design and a lot of the design guidelines that we've been talking about, but I think it also gets into how larger developments are broken up. And I think when we look at a 300 unit development that is just a big wall of units around a courtyard, we're basically looking at an environment that is going to, it's not going to nurture a sense of safety and feeling that you can put your kids out in the courtyard and want to be playing with a couple other kids or some older kids and keep an eye on them. You're going to be farther away from that courtyard. You're not going to necessarily know everyone in that building. And so if that size of development can be broken up into smaller components where maybe it's 20 or 30 households around a courtyard, and those eyes are on that courtyard, those people in that courtyard share certain amenities, so there's more likelihood that they know each other, that's going to create more of an opportunity for that community that's going to appeal to families. So those are some of my comments.
Let's see, Buzz and then Kyrie.
I just have one point I'd like clarified. Would these new rules and regulations that we may adopt apply to the 3 existing projects currently under consideration who paid fees and submitted plans in conformance with the existing regulations?
Yes and no. The fact of having filed an application does not necessarily exempt you from a change of regulations. The project is not considered vested until after the building permit's been issued, basically. But so these, if whatever new regulations are adopted, would, unless the city council in the ordinance writes in explicit exemptions, they would apply to projects currently in the pipeline, including the Nady project and the Anton 6701 Shell Mount and the Sherwin-Williams project. The Marketplace, however, is a PUD, and that PUD was approved in 2008. They already have their entitlements through that PUD, so that is a vested project in terms of entitlements. What they are before the Planning Commission for now are what are called final development plans, which is basically design review. Our regulations specifically say that PUDs are subject to the regulations that were in effect when the PUD was approved. That could be changed, but that's what the regulations currently say. Having said that, I would say that the developers of the Marketplace have been, in my view, making a good faith effort to try to comply with what we're coming up with now, and they have been having extensive meetings with our design consultant who has worked on our family-friendly design guidelines. They've had lengthy meetings just to review their unit plans to try to ensure that they're as family-friendly as they can make them. But unless we change the code in that regard, they would not be subject to these new regulations. Kyrie.
Just getting back to our discussion questions, my comments are with regard to the minimum percentage of 2 and 3 bedroom units be required. I agree that we definitely should include that as a provision to make it mandatory. As far as percentage, I still want to have more input on that before I would say exactly what that should be, but I'm leaning towards the 50 to 60%. And then just to comment, I guess to touch on what you just said, Charlie, about Marketplace, one of the things that I've always encouraged developers that come before the Planning Commission is to try to strike a balance between having more 2 and 3 bedroom units, and I do see that Marketplace is making an effort to do that. What I'd like to see happen, though, is that when those projects step away from the Planning Commission, that just doesn't fall by the wayside during construction, because when things get changed, and it's very difficult to find out after the fact that things have changed, and there needs to be oversight that they're actually going to implement what they're telling us they're going to implement when they come to the Planning Commission and the City Council.
Well, just on that, I would note that staff does make our best effort, and when building permit plans come to us for review and sign off, we pull out the planning commission approved plans and we lay them side by side and we make sure that they match. And we don't sign off the building permit until we're sure that it's what the planning commission approved. So we try to keep on top of that.
Okay, because that's really important.
Right.
As far as the family-friendly design guidelines, I'm in support of having that apply to all 2+ bedroom units, because I think that the benefits of what are in the guidelines benefit pretty much everyone, whether you're a family with children or, I mean, it also suits the definitions of many different types of families, and family doesn't necessarily involve children. So kind of like the universal design thing that you were talking about. As far as the minimum unit size being established, I'm going to take a slightly different tack on the agnostic thing and say that I feel that we shouldn't go any less than what we have seen so far. So this chart that you have, the average size of units between 1994 and 2015, I would say we don't want to go any less than that and see these like micro studios, and because I think that can be problematic. So that's my take on that. As far as exceptions, I agree that there should be a process, but I'd like to understand a bit more about the comment that was made in one of our previous meetings where I think it was an affordable housing, either developer or designer, I don't know exactly his title, but he did comment and say that, they would be, I guess there were certain units that, based upon the size, they wouldn't achieve the funding that they need. So I just want to understand more about that statement. Was that just private funding, or was that, federal funding? Because we don't want to have affordable projects go at risk because we're saying that it has to be a certain size. So I just want to understand more about that before we say.
Catherine, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so he was talking about tax credit units, and the tax credit unit does have rules about sort of luxury aspects of projects, and size is one of those. But the 3706 San Pablo has the units that are, as the 3 and 4 bedroom units are as large as what the family-friendly guidelines had put in them as a minimum, and there's no problem with those.
Okay.
Right. I don't think my take on that was, I'm not as familiar with that issue, certainly as Catherine is, but my take on what he was saying was that it wasn't a hard and fast rule. It was just that there were certain standards they were kind of looking for, and if you were bigger than those standards, it might cause you a problem with getting funding. That was what my take on it.
And then the last thing I want to say is I really appreciate the couple of folks that came here from the community and talked about their concerns, and I feel like it's really important to involve more of that input, as I've seen in the past. And one of the reasons that brought me to the Planning Commission as a long-term resident was being at a community workshop and being able to provide input on something that directly impacted me. So I would really like to have that process happen here in this discussion, that we have some community workshops around this whole discussion, because we're making the decision and affect a lot of other folks. And I know that that's, difficult, and there's a challenge to do that, but I think that it's really important to understand what people really want that live here, or even what their friends want that may be considering, moving to Emeryville to raise families. So.
Okay. I would note that we sent that postcard, I believe, to every resident.
I got two copies.
And and this is what we got. So
I know. I just wish that there were more input, though. I think it's that important.
Were we also asking for a workshop, which should be more community involvement rather than just a public meeting?
Right. It would be a workshop, similar to what we did for the traffic calming thing.
Well, the general plan update steering committee.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah.
So that where the public has more input and has a better chance to talk to us.
Okay. Well, there's a balance between that and how quickly you want these regulations adopted.
Can I ask Catherine a follow-up question?
Sure.
So this is really sort of more related to the second half of this, but the tax credits have come up a couple times, so I want to ask a question. Would you anticipate that units that would be affordable under sort of the bonus system, the revised bonus system that's sort of recommended for the second half, would you anticipate that those would be tax credit units?
A developer might choose to do a 4% tax project if there was enough affordable units in the project. It's unlikely that they would be a 9% tax project. There's slightly different reasons why. Most 9% tax project units are 100% affordable, but some 4% units, 4% tax project units are mixed income. So it could be, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I saw Ruth and Gail. All right, so Ruth first.
So to weigh in on the discussion questions, first of all, I want to appreciate all the staff who went to very in-depth analysis. It's very obvious. And you mentioned trend lines are computer generated. I don't know if I'd have the brain power to figure that out.
I learned how to do that in planning school, but that was about more years ago than I care to mention.
Well, so to answer the questions that staff's posing to us to frame the discussion, yes, we should require a minimum percentage. My concern if we go with the 50 and 10 is that we don't make up for past imbalance. And I think we need to really focus on trying to have a more balanced city, not just balance it on a per project by project basis, because the city is more than just the sum of its projects. It has to hang together. And all of the larger bedrooms units should be designed in a way that could be conducive to raising children. As has been pointed out, it wouldn't really hurt anybody else who chooses to live there. But I also want to make, as we move towards requiring these larger units, we also have to require the amenities that everybody says are essential to really make it work. It's not just interior space. I mean, yes, there are cities and large cities where children just are raised in apartments, but it's also dependent on having a city park across the street, or it's to be able to run around outside. I really appreciate Brad's comments about breaking up a large parcel into common area play spaces or other kinds of spaces where it just feels more, where there could be more eyes and ears, and it's a smaller scale within the larger whole. I could talk about like the courtyards would have been a perfect project with all these internal courtyards where they could have been designed with a public amenity that signaled something different than what's there now. I think we also need to, you're just asking about interior, but I also think we need to be requiring those kind of public amenities that would allow for that, not just like landscaped courtyards, but active play spaces. Climbing structures need to be required in at least some portion of the open space or in common areas. And then, if there's a common room, that it has the capability for indoor games and playing, and you get the idea. So, yes, these should be required, and they need to go in with the amenities that will actually make a project work. You mentioned the Santa Cruz lower unit sizes, but you didn't say how well that's working or not.
I don't know. I just got that from their document.
That
was for affordable units.
Okay, so yeah, but still, we don't know how well that's working.
No, we don't.
And if they're calm, relaxing, safe havens, or if they're boiler cookers, because they're too crowded. So I don't really know what to say, except I do think people need a certain amount of comfortable living space and not to be jammed in. And the only thing I could say on a basis for exceptions might be overriding location, but I can't imagine what that would be. So if there was some reason for exceptions to the unit mix, I guess I would be open to reviewing it on a case-by-case basis, but I just can't think of any circumstances where an exception would have validity. I just don't get it.
Can I? Sure.
Right.
Can I say something?
All right, Catherine.
So you might have certain special needs populations that would, a disabled household that needs a caretaker, and in that case, you might want the sort of two master suite sort of situation. So there are certain populations that if you are designing for that population, then they wouldn't necessarily want the family-friendly unit design. They might have a special unit design that was needed for these different populations. So that's the type of exception I would expect. Generally, that would come with an affordable housing component as well.
Gail?
I agree that, well, I think that the 50 and 10% level of unit mix is appropriate, and I think that we should also incentivize beyond that. I think as a requirement, the 50% makes sense. I think we should try to move towards a more balanced total number, but I think that doing that with incentives is a realistic way to do it. I think that it's the unit size. I agree with Scott that design is a really key factor, and if they're designed well, we should be able to look at them and see whether they work or not. Excuse me. And I do think that there should be a process at looking for exceptions. And the first thing that came to mind for me was senior housing. If there are unrelated seniors that might want to each have their own unit, but together with their own space together within a unit. So I think that it's possible that there are circumstances where people don't need to have all the bedrooms together and would like to have their own bathroom attached to their bedroom, things like that. So I think that there needs to be some mechanism for looking at a case-by-case basis and seeing whether an exception should be made. I'm also a little bit, on the design end, I'm a little bit mixed about whether units above the requirement should be all family friendly, because I do think that there's a lot of creative living spaces that can be created that might not need to have the wide hallway with bathrooms in this location and that. So I think that a little bit of flexibility on the units beyond what we're requiring would not be a bad thing.
I think you heard it from everybody.
Yeah.
Not me.
Scott.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go last. But, and Scott. Okay.
Well, go ahead.
Well,
So first of all, I want to thank staff for the really great staff report. And if anybody, even though it took me 3 whole evenings to get through it, I enjoyed every minute of it.
It was a real page turner.
Yeah, no, seriously, it was. It was. So if anybody here has not read the staff report, the presentation only starts to do it justice. There's a lot of additional great data in it, and I would encourage you to do so. And along with that, so I actually asked Charlie for one additional statistic that he generated, and that is the standard error of the regression analysis. And so I'm not a statistician, but as best that I can explain it, it is the average distance that the observed values lie from the trend line. So it's sort of it says how accurate a prediction the trend line is of the actual data. And so I just bring that up. I may, as we kind of get through this, I may bring that up at different points, but I'll just give you like one example, which is that 2+ bedroom units compared to the percentage of households with children comparing that to 3+ bedroom units as a percentage compared to the percentage of households with children. Not only is the 2+ bedrooms versus families with children, not only is it a stronger correlation, but it also has it's also a better predictor of the actual data.
Based on the standard error.
Based on the standard error, yeah. So for me, anyway, that kind of just defines like what are the reasonable expectations, like the standard error is calculated in such a way that like 95% of the actual outcomes, the actual data should be within the standard error. So it kind of defines what we can reasonably expect if we affect one of the variables. Then we could reasonably expect that we would fall somewhere within that range. What else? As far as the discussion questions, I would also support the staff recommendation on unit mix, the 50% 2+ bedrooms to 10% 3+ bedrooms. So as far as the family-friendly guidelines I think are pretty critical, and I would really encourage the council, as you guys take that up, to review them very thoroughly. For me, as I said at the meeting where we considered them, it's a lot of, to me, very nebulous standards. I mean, I also don't have children, so I'm trying to, evaluate what makes units family-friendly for other people and thinking about myself in the future. So I don't approach that from experience. So, but I would encourage you all to review that very carefully, because I think that's a very critical component of this, and I'll get back to that actually with exceptions too. Whether or not those guidelines should be applied to units beyond what are required, I'm going to go ahead and disagree with what I've heard here, just because that was sort of my initial reaction, and I haven't yet completely been convinced otherwise. But I also will say it's not something I feel adamantly about. But my gut reaction was that we're trying to encourage unit mix and unit diversity. And the two groups are sort of not mutually exclusive. I think the family-friendly guidelines hopefully create units that are appropriate for families. They're also appropriate for other people. Even if you look at the guidelines, even the undesirable examples, create units which are appropriate for other types of households, but they're not necessarily not appropriate for families with children or families. So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think we're trying to create a mix. So that was my initial thought, was that I realize we already do have a lot of units of the undesirable type, perhaps. So yeah. So I mean, and that is that's a description. The mayor mentioned something about was talking about kind of the city as an aggregate and looking at the city as a whole. I was reading a really good article yesterday about diversity in cities and compared to integration in cities, and so that the difference there is kind of the city as a whole versus the neighborhood and the block level. So it's very much something, it's very much the same thing. So again, that's sort of a question mark. That was my initial reaction, and I like I said, my mind has not been completely changed, but I don't feel that strongly about it. Then I will say, regarding the exceptions, I would support some exceptions. I mean, I always kind of support hard-earned flexibility. I do think it needs to be hard-earned, and so if we were going to allow exceptions, I think the finding should be something to the effect of the applicant has demonstrated that there are amenities and characteristics of the proposed housing that show that it will be suitable for families or something like that. And then lastly, I wanted to follow up on a comment. Well, it was a comment that was given a couple of times regarding projects that feel like fortresses. So I am actually going to propose this. This isn't something that's included in the presentation or anywhere on the staff report, but I am going to propose an additional regulation, which I've not received a lot of support for so far. But I feel extremely passionate about it, so even if I continue to not receive support, I will continue to bring it up.
You go.
And that is that I don't think that, I think that our projects and our community should be designed in such a way that people are not able to pull into a parking garage and take an elevator directly to their unit. I think, as is true in a lot of urban areas, that you should have to exit the parking garage out onto the street and enter the building through a lobby, so that you have to then interact with the street, interact with the neighborhood around you, interact with the lobby of your building and the people that are also entering through that lobby. I think in most buildings, this is true for pedestrians. Anyone that's approaching the building as a pedestrian or a bicyclist would enter through the lobby. But unfortunately, a lot of the time for drivers, we allow them to drive into a parking garage and enter the building through a different means. I think that anyone in a community can be asocial if they choose, but I don't, as community members, we have to interact with people in our community on a day-to-day basis, and I don't think we should coddle people who are trying to avoid those interactions.
Scott.
Just one last comment here, that I've heard things that are new today from what we have traditionally talked about. And this is, the Bay Area is made up of all these cities, 106 cities. We're not Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. We don't have all roads leading to one place. The Bay Area, by necessity, has to invent themselves. And we're being asked to do that right now. We could invent some Emeryville new guidelines. I just heard a suggestion here that was kind of new, that maybe it's been done elsewhere. Traditional cities are like that. I really am responding to what Commissioner Gunkel talked about focusing within a large project, smaller community areas. I think we can do what we have going forward, these large projects, if they are focused into smaller sub-communities. And I think that we should really be serious about that. If we looked at the first presentation about what we are, we're extreme. We are a city of large projects. Well, we have to make some decisions that are different than other cities. And I think what we've heard today about the fortress idea and then how to address it by making sub-communities, that's where we need to go. And that we might not have an exact definition of that, but I think we have to get there. I think we need to define that. I think that's the key for us.
I'd like to second that.
Okay. Any further comments from the Commissioner Council? All right, good timing. It's 10 after 12. We are ready for lunch. We'll be back in about 20 minutes.